Hi, you're watching NameSleuth. My name is Angelo, and I am my first video here, officially on YouTube, talking about names. A little backstory about myself, and so I've been interested in names for a really, really long time since I was a kid. Sorry for my mom saying that my name meant I was God's little angel. So I said, okay, why do I not feel so special? So I started looking into my entire name to understand what it meant because that was where they didn't understand, right? And as I went through that whole journey, I was using online resources at the time, a lot of baby naming sites, right? And just cycling through, seeing what all the links were. This was early days of Google, right? Of learning what my names meant. Okay, and I would write down the meaning and so forth. Um, I didn't know at the time. There was a lot more you could do, but that was the best of my ability. Maybe there was no other options at the time. I don't know, but so I would not only just look at the names and their meanings, but then also start to play around with the letters of them. And this crazy idea to look at them backwards, spell them backwards, and see what happens. And I think that may have been spun off from the study of numerology through ordinal numerology, which is essentially assigning a value to a name, to a letter, and then use that as a codex, as a legend, I think is what to say, as a way of a cipher, like a cipher of understanding how to look at the names, and then secret messages. You know what I mean? Like you send one A is 1, Z is 26, and all letters and so forth fill in those gaps. And so, as far as the English alphabet is concerned, so writing notes to your friends and stuff like that, same concept. I would take that and then look at what the numbers were, and so that led me to reverse the orders and so forth, and just playing around, just trying to figure it all out. And then I moved on to other interests at the time, and then ultimately ended up meeting a really brilliant rabbi by the name of Chinuch Dov ben Lishvas V. Hirsch, otherwise known as Howard Hoffman, and I mean he have a Liyat Nishma. May his soul have arisen. He's no longer with us today, but only through his teachings, right, and through his children. So I got to learn with him for just about a decade, and that was a great experience. I learned a lot through him. Um, but he would always say this line. He would say, "Names are psychological profiles." And so, very curiously, I would say, "Okay, that sounds interesting." That aligns to what a lot of my early work was. So I decided to get back into it, studying names in the course of learning with him, and discovered that there was some unique things to take away from, right? So most times we were introduced to names in relation to aptonyms, right, which is the study of aptonyms is the study of occupational names that are apt, right, that are appropriate to that name. So, if your name was Booker, then it would be most likely work in a library or work with literature or academics. If your name was let's say Bolt, right, like Usain Bolt, the fastest runner in the world or one of the top fastest runners in history, he again, his last name means to imply that he's fast, right? So how if we find this little crack in the concrete about names through aptonyms, which is highly debated, right? I said, what if this not only extended to first names, but there was a whole world to names that we weren't even keying in on, right? Maybe other cultures had, or just we hadn't really collected enough ideas to think further. So I said, all right, let's take a look at this and see. And fortunately for me, I was able to key in on that. Yes, there are other cultures that have considered this a reality. One of which being Judaism, a really great example of that. So we started diving more into it. Now their system, of course, uses the Hebrew letters. So we're talking about Aleph through Tav, and if you include the Sofit, you have the Mitzapech, right? And of course, this continued to evolve into understanding how the vowels work and the characteristics of certain letters combinations, right? Like we notice characteristics with people with like Abigail or Abraham, right? Because the aleph and the vet in their name, or bet respectively, seems to result in very similar behavior, right? Or take, for instance, when it comes to vowels, like how that name actually misses not only a letter at some points in its storytelling in the Torah, or I should say in the Tanakh, but then also the vowel structure changes as well. And so we started to realize that these little nuances that most people don't pick up on, at least there isn't a lot of teaching I found on it, there's a lot to that. There's a reason why it happens, and there's many sources. The Talmud and Midrash discuss what these issues are and why they're missing. But to go into depth in them and then to apply it into other names is what the real magic is, what the real bracha is. So I just wanted to focus on understanding names at that point in my life. I said, you know what, I think this is my pathway. And so my first name is Angelo, and so that also helped as well because the first time that we encounter an angel in the Torah in Genesis 16 is also the time where a name is given right directly from heaven. Right, it says an angel of Hashem, right, Malach Hashem. So we understand that names definitely have a sense of holdings to them and divinity, and that's what we were exploring at the time. So that's what we're doing on this channel. We are going to be talking about names, going into depth with them. I started my channel on TikTok, and was producing content there, and I still will be. I just kind of think tanks, but this channel right here on YouTube, I really want to focus on the depth of the study. TikTok is more so for just quick interest, catch yourself 3 seconds kind of stuff. Attention spans these days, whatever. But I want YouTube to be the idea behind the YouTube channel is to say I want people to come and find more than what people have ever given them in the entire history of the internet, right? Which is still young at this point in the game. There's a lot to learn about names. It isn't just about the letters, and people have these interpretations of letters. Okay, whatever, that's fine. Okay, or just stuck on the numerology of a name. There's people that say just numerology of a name. I wanted to go deeper. I wanted to see, okay, could we leverage an entire history um, through language to understand these names, right? And if truly, as it's been taught, that all the original language of the world, according to the Torah, was Hebrew in Genesis 11, and then was shattered into all these different languages. And Hebrew is the epicenter, right? Hebrew is where it all begins. And so that's what we're doing. We wanted to explore what Hebrew can do. We A lot of our study also involved Hebrew names, but then we decided to go a step further and explore non-Jewish names, like non-Hebrew names, non-Arabic names, like Livia, like Irma, like Weekly, right? Discover these names and see, can Hebrew, if you reverse engineer these names through a process called Shaital, which is basically like a hybrid transliteration, could you discover and even understand that name in a different perspective, right? But still in alignment with its original or at least recorded understanding of it. We've also used the Chatal method to restructure names as well, right? So because we've determined that you could look at a name from one language and then triangulate the similar meaning to another, right? Or with another in mind, we realized that you could also then take that same model and use it to restructure names and to verify that the name is correct in relation to other methodologies such as pattern recognition, understanding the behaviors of a person, the native, right? The native, the archetype. And seeing, okay, there's some key characteristics with this name. Let's see if we can see the same signature and hone out if it's accurate or not. So that's been a peel pull relationship and very, very useful. So yeah, that's what names are, right? There's a whole world to names. And I think one of the key things to take away from and to remember if you are a person interested in names is to first off understand your birth story, right? So we'll go more. We have so much to teach with you and to share with you, but and we hope to learn with you. I have many groups online, um, small groups where we just learn over Zoom, or we do one-on-one sessions with people to help them understand their name, even with families, right? Families are really fun to talk with because there's a lot of backstory with names, right? And your birth story is key. So let's get into that real quickly. It's probably one of the most pressing things I want to impress upon you today is the understanding your birth story. Okay, so I take a quick little swig of water there. So here's the deal: birth stories. Your name. and how it comes to being is so important. So important. Now, let me explain. So, your birth story is first starts off with simply how were you born, right? Were you cesarean or were you the traditional vaginal method? Were you born into water or traditional screaming your head off in a hospital, in these straddles, right? What is your birth story? Most people don't know how they were born, right? A lot of women can be a bit timid or embarrassed or what have you, all this isms with this thing, but it's vital to understand your birth story. Why? Because that is usually about the time in a lot of cultures where you get your name. Now, there's some cultures that wait about a week, like Judaism, for instance, before you're given a name. I think for the males, for the females, they get their names right away, and the baby naming ceremony. But those names are still in process, right? They're still developing. But what do we know, right? Jeremiah says what? Yirmiyahu says that Hashem, he knew us in the womb, right? That God, the creator of the world, or Banu Shalem, knew us in the womb, right? Knew our names in the womb. In fact, the Midrash says regarding Jeremiah that he refused to come out of the womb and tell his father and his mother uh, pronounce his name correctly. Not just had his name, but then pronounced it correctly. And this is key because then Eliyahu came and said, "This is your name." And so Jeremiah said, "Because you got it correctly, I'll add the letters of Eliyahu's name at the end of his name, which is the letters of Hashem." And so then now it became Yirmiyahu, right? I think it was just Yirmi, and now it became Yirmiyahu. There's a midrash in this one. So we know that Hashem, that like the creator of the universe, knew us in the womb. Therefore, as partners in creation, as male and female, Hashem imparts into them these names, right? Of course, the mother, of course, has the child. In most cases, unless it's a surrogacy, right, or adopted situation, most cases the mother spends 9 months with the child, right? So there's that, right? And so when you're looking at your birth story, it's important to understand it's important to understand what what is uh, what is that, right? What was involved with that? Where were you born, right? Of course, all the horoscope stuff, the time and the place and all that stuff. That's good, the date. But going more into what was the atmosphere like in the hospital, right? I remember when I was the birth of my children was very, very different. We went to one hospital. It was very nice, very calm, very supportive, lots of resources, just a well lit hospital. But then we went to a city hospital sometime, right, for the birth of one of my other children, and oh man, I tell you, it was night and day. This particular hospital was very, let's say, matriarchy. They were very much so hostile towards men. I could sense the energy. It was very, very strange. I don't know if maybe it was just the way that the birth went by and my not paying attention because I was working at the time, make sure things kept going while she was incapacitated, or if it was just the way that they did things there. But your birth story is really key, and so I pay attention to that with my children, right? And you should too pay attention to your own life and your children's life if that's your situation. But your birth story is really key, right? And it can help shift the way things were. It's really fascinating because in that one situation where we had the very not so happy, if you will, happy engagement at that hospital for that one child, their name resembled that, right? About being happy and being comforted, right? So I just thought that's really fascinating. That your birth story is really key, right? Let's talk about names, right? So the other aspect of birth stories that's really important to determine your name is that most people, when they talk about how they get their names, someone will say, "Oh, it was the family tradition to name the child this," right? Or if it was maybe there was a political aspect to this, like, okay, this person paid off something for us, so we'll name our first child after you, right? It's transactional, right? So understanding the energy in which your name is produced is really, really key, um, because it can influence your life. It can influence your life if you're not careful, if you're not conscious, and you're wondering why things go the way they do, why relationships are the way they are, or why you keep attracting experiences. This is the reason why, or it can be one of the reasons why, is the way that your name came into being, right? The backstory of that name. And so, studying your birth story is really key. What was the psychology of your mother at the time? What was going on in a relationship? Again, studies have shown that. 9 months before conception influences and impregnates the 9 months from conception to birth, right? Give or take. So it's important to understand how that also plays an effect as well. Where's all that go from? There's a unique story that I tell about Halle Berry. We'll get to that in just a second. Taking a swig of water. So, Halle Berry, as far as like birth story is concerned. So, what's curious about Halle Berry? I was tracking her name one time. She was her original name was actually not Halle Berry, it was Maria Holly, right? But then she changed it to Holly Maria Berry. Later on, there's whole backstory with her father and so forth, and just her, women. They need to people need to change, they evolve, and so she flowed with her name differently. So I started looking up what this name Holly means, like what the Holly came from, and then discovered that there was a department store named Holly, right? And I was like, why would you name your child after a department store? And so as I'm digging deeper into her name, we begin to learn that there was a time where this department store had a children's section, right? And to make matters more interesting, in order to help sell toys during Christmas season, they started a TV show featuring an elf that was Santa's helper. Okay, and so it became very impressionable. The TV show, people really loved it. If you look on YouTube, there's some great videos on that, and you watch the comments, and they'll say, okay, this was a part of my childhood, really important. So apparently, this was a very impressionable time. So she was named after this department store. But the intention, right? So the department store was the marker, right? But that department store has all this other backstory to it too. So we dive in deeper. And so we look into the elf because that was the craziest question. Like, why name your kid after a department store? Why name your kid after a department store that had a children's section that had a TV show? Like, what's the big deal? Well, it's just fascinating, right? So we go deeper into this whole story of understanding this elf, right? And it turns out this elf happened to be a retired police officer. Actually, no, he wasn't retired at the time. He was a police officer that was getting part-time work, right, at the office, right? To help make ends meet, right? Be able to pay for laundry and so forth, right? Extra bills. So this department store had this TV show, and this officer would be the elf. Okay, and I found some stuff where it talked about how the this officer would actually take keys from the jail, right, and use them as props. Now, why is that of any importance? Because you have to understand that elements, right, objects like this glass of water I've been sipping on, right? This glass of water, it has energy, right? We do things with things are have assignment to them. And so names are big about place, right? About placement and about consistency, about trading channels for energy. So here's what's really cool, right? The keys that were used were from a jail, and this is an actual prop. So kids around the world were able to witness this energy that was simply identified as keys. Okay, you with me still? So we go forward, right? And now we look at Holly Berry's career. And what do we find? We find that the one Academy Award that she got was for a movie involving the law enforcement, right? That was involving the correction center. So she gets Monster Ball. She ends up getting a an Oscar for playing in that. And what was her role, right? She was a mother of an obese child of a African American family, and her husband was the one that was on death row, right? And so it turns out that she ends up befriending and, of course, having intimacy with this correction officer that ends up being the executioner for her husband. Now, some might say that's a coincidence, but that isn't the only story I found where something like that is linked back to the birth story, right? Understanding where a name comes from, the origins of a name. So there's many examples. So it's important to understand what are the stories that are involved in your name, right? Who are you named after? What did they do? What was important? Why was the impression there, right? That's very, very important because your very life, your success, and where you come in from could determine on that, right? So I'd be curious if Halle Berry just focused on films that were about vigilantes. Like, what does she play? She plays Storm in X-Men, right? Which is kind of fun because what winter is associated with what, right? Remember, she was an elf who worked with Santa, who's known for what? The North Pole, right? So North Pole, of course, is considered to be a cold place, but also, what do you think about North Pole? You think about snow. So how much was her ability to play Storm in the X-Men, a very successful franchise, key back to her name, right? Back to that whole world and the mythology and the stories surrounding this name. Things to think about, right? The department store did really well around what time of season? Winter, right? Because of what? Because of Christmas. So So that's what we do. We look at names and we understand the stories around them. And so your birth story is key, so key. Who you're named after, why you're named that way, and do you connect with your name? Do you find that you relate to it, you like your name, or do you have some grievances with it? And so, working with myself, or just taking the steps, learning from this channel, and taking steps into your own life to do the work, you can begin to unravel the discontent of a name, your name, right, and try to find balance and harmony and of course ultimately success through leveraging your name. So that's what I want to impart upon you today is to go study your name. Um, Check us out. We do one-on-one sessions, Zoom sessions, where we work with groups and definitely with families. Families are really fun. Families or just individuals, a couple or couples, right? Studying your name is really important. If you're looking for a baby name, that's another one we do. We love working with baby names to help you understand the psychology behind what's there and the blessings that you're sending through a name. It's important to know too that your name is also your blessing. So you got to keep in tune with that. You're watching NameSleuth, and I hope that you enjoyed this video. It was our first introduction video, and we hope to do a lot more. So stay tuned. Thank you so much.